post where they're like, oh, a bishop was like, the people came to our country and they told us to look down and pray, and they brought us their Bibles and said, close your eyes and pray, and then we looked up and suddenly we had their Bibles and they had our land. And it's going to be hard to get people to accept the message. Like, oh, we got something for you, but by the way, everything you have is coming this way because that's what we want.
My first introduction to politics.
There you are.
Good morning, everybody.
Christian, come on, brother.
I do not have a lot of announcements. Actually, more than anything. So, but I'm trying to think. After the election, I hope everybody's kind of settling down.
Don't say that word. Don't even bring up the issue. Just keep moving.
We're not testing.
Not at my house. Not on the outside of the house anyway, but I'm just going to stop right there. Go ahead.
Well, we are going to send around a card for Taylor and Natalie. We are still waiting to see where the dust is settling and where they end up.
Well, y'all tell me where she stayed. Like she moved. She was in a house, I thought in another state, and he was here until they got married. Then he's moving to where she is, and that's his residence.
And I believe she's a school teacher, so they said she's in the school system.
Okay.
Right now they're in East Cobb. I talked to him one time. And he said they're out in East Cobb and they're just trying to figure out everything. So
okay.
I don't know.
Okay, so the house, so it's not another state, it's another county.
I believe that to be so.
You can't let me.
No, that's all right. And I could be wrong. I could be misinterpreting. It could have changed. I talked about it 2 months ago. Right, they could be in Pakistan by now. And I wouldn't know.
I just knew he said they would not be coming back to this church. They're going to go to a church where they live.
Rest.
Yeah.
That's what he told me. He told me that.
Well, and again, we just wanted to send some encouragement to them and some celebration. So we're going to pass around the card for Taylor and Natalie, Matheny, and.
And do y'all need a pen?
Yes, please.
Okay.
That's it. I mean, the other stuff that's going on, Mike Passetti, he came up here real quick just to give me notes that he's actually rushing off to help a friend's family that had a buddy of his just passed away after having basic knee surgery. And, was in rehab and had, the clot movement up into he never came really out of the surgery. He did go to rehab, but then just felt poorly, and then they put him in an induced coma after he had, the main issue, and they never came out of it. So he's rushing to be with the family and stuff like that. So he asked for prayers there. I know the Baton Rouge trip has been down with only 6 people, so they thought they could have had as many as 9 to begin with. They ended up working with only 6, but then what Jeff was just telling me, the host church, which is the First Presbyterian Church of Baton Rouge, complimented their team with some folks there, so they were able to knock out a lot of good work. But it's back to that same thing. They've got like a 9-hour drive ahead of them after working for 3 long days. So throughout the day today, they're on their way back. So just keep them in your prayers. And I know even with Jeff, that I don't know how many folks know the Beasy family, but
hey, can we bring you down?
Sure.
Okay. All right. This is Trent and Dallas, and they're going to talk about youth missions and what we're doing next summer. So.
Okay.
Alright, so we're going on 3 mission trips, Toronto, Guatemala, and Baltimore. And we're trying to raise $60,000 for 65 students to go on those trips. And so basically, there's a poster right here, and you basically call or contact that number, and they'll send however many students you want, to your house to do household things for you, or rake leaves or something like that. And this is to raise money for the mission trip. Last year we raised $11,000 this way, so it works pretty well. And and also if there's a big project, we'll get a adult to come with us so that it's safe and stuff.
Thank you for sharing, and thank you guys for having a heart to serve Jesus. We appreciate that.
Thank you.
Keep us posted on how we can help.
Okay.
Thank you.
You just can't bring them over and say, here's a chainsaw. Go
Right. What's wrong with that, man? They gotta learn responsibility some kind of way, right?
Baton Rouge, 9-hour trip back.
Baton Rouge, they're leaving. They should be on the road right now, so that's going to be a tough trip. And then, Mike Veazey has been going through quite a bit in his rehab. I know he's been on a lot of prayer requests from church, but just right now he's fighting through some stuff. I guess as he had some cardiac issues that led to this latest relapse. Parts of his he had blood loss to certain areas of his legs. So right now there is a involuntary movement that's happening pretty much every time he puts weight on his legs. And,
Movement in his
in
leg?
his legs, yeah. So it's a lot of just jittery leg that's happening. He's having a hard time even going through the rehab to get prepared to walk again. So again, it's just really back to the point of keeping him covered with prayer as much as we can. There's a lot more going on. Like I said, it's been a tumultuous week with the elections and everything, but we certainly pray for our nation. So,
How about the Thanksgiving food drive? Is
that today was the day. They are collecting stuff, so if you want to run out, if you forgot, bring it back. They have the.
There's still time.
There's still time. That's right.
And I think they're having after church today. They're doing a sorting,
Yes.
right? And I think there might be some pizza lunch involved for anyone who wants it. But
They are looking for volunteers. Yes. So,
Okay, so I would work like I gotta drop the boys off and then pick them up later, so maybe I'll sort out.
yeah, we're gonna be there with our kids for a while, as long as the kids don't.
No, our kids are going to be down there too. So, and from what I heard, Beth Tully was looking for a lot of help.
Okay, well, I'll do that.
That's good. Take place where? I believe in the dining hall.
I think that's right. And there. Anyway, while he's looking at that, also, y'all know next week is combined worship service, and then we're going to have the fellowship for Ken Anderson because it's his retirement. He's been here 40 or 50 years. They are asking for help. What they did was they bought the food, but we actually have to put it together. In other words, we're going to do barbecue sandwiches and things. So if you would consider that instead of perhaps going to the service, maybe.
You're saying they're gonna actually
In the dining room, we're actually going to be putting the sandwiches and things together. I think it's Slopes Barbecue, but we bought the fixings and things, but we actually have to put it together.
And this is personal, and there may be other people. There are people that cannot eat buns. So if everything is a sandwich, there will be some people that cannot eat.
Yeah, okay.
Like Karen.
Like Karen Patterson. Right.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. And I'm just throwing.
No, I get you. You may.
I'm just
I'm
throwing that
not
out.
joking when I say maybe you want to come and get your little plate, put it aside. I'm
Go
not
right in there
serious.
and grab it.
I'm serious
But I
because
just wanted to think, because I'm sure I'm not the only person.
I'm positive
who has
you're not.
that issue.
Scrape
Yeah.
it
A lot
off
of
the
people-
buns, you scrape it off the bun.
Say that again.
Well,
Well, there's a lot of. I could probably do that because a lot of people can't even have it.
can't touch it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so that's a good thought. We'll have to find out how much help I need, but I probably will do that instead of going to the service because we're saving money, but in saving money we have to put in the sweat equity. So, all right. Any other announcements for the class?
I was going to say, Richard, do you want to pray us in?
I'll be glad to. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you again for bringing us into your presence, Lord, and just as a group to fellowship with you and learn more about your truth and your word, Lord. We thank you for Sebastian's time, and we pray that you will bless this. This as he presents this to us today. Lord, we pray for the team coming back from Baton Rouge, Lord, and especially for Mike Veazey, Lord, that you would present some healing, Lord, and that we just lift him up and think about him, Lord, and just his legs, Lord, and just that you would bring comfort there. And Lord, we also thank you for the youth mission team that we have here, Lord. We're excited to work, Lord, to earn, to even go out and serve you, Lord. And it's just a wonderful thought. And Lord, we pray for them and their success, and Lord, we pray for mission teams all over this world, Lord, who are working so hard and bringing your word to everybody, Lord. And let us think about that here at home too, Lord, because we're doing it often, especially over the past week, Lord. We can see visually on the TV screen and everything, all the unrest, Lord, that exists within this country, Lord. And it's primarily because people just don't know you, Lord. And we just think of an opportunity to reach out to them and present to them your message in a time of great strife, Lord, because you provide us opportunities in everything. Lord, thank you for this time, Lord. And again, we pray all this in Jesus' name.
Amen. All right. Thank you. So we are to Ruth. And before I forget, I had a slide on here. I don't know what happened to it, but those of you who are kind of checking this out, remember we have a Facebook group. It's called E415 Truth and Love at DBC. So I post our class notes there every week. Also, you can find me, Sebastian Suma's channel on YouTube, because I have to put it through YouTube, then get it to Facebook. So if you don't do Facebook, you can get on the YouTube page and find it
You
there.
want us to follow you?
Oh, I need followers. I want followers. I need y'all to like the page. No, I mean it's all to my glory.
You
I'm
want
just
your
saying.
check from the
Right. But if you do Facebook, come find us on Facebook. It should be easy. It's a closed group, so I think you'll have to send me a request if you try to sign up. I don't really know how that works. We'll work it out as we go. If you don't do Facebook, it's on YouTube and it's accessible to the public there. So, all right, verse 16. We left with Ruth has had the baby. So many things have come to pass, and they have finalized, and they are fixed, as only God can. And so we're finishing up the last chapter of Ruth. And Ruth has had the child Obed, and we're going to talk about what that name means in a minute. So it says, Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. Now, the word here for child is yeled. And if y'all remember very, very, very way back in the beginning when we first started this, it says Naomi lost her yeled, that God took her yeled from her. And that was her 2 sons. Now here we are at the end of the book and she has a yeled again. So that is closure for Naomi. Now she has a child in her lap, but she never would have thought that that would ever happen. But God has done it for her. As we have talked about, this is part of why we say the book is so tightly constructed, because a word that was kind of unusual in the beginning of the story because it was not really applicable to adult sons. Her sons were adult when they died, and she used the word yeled, my boys are dead. Now we use that same word again at the end, and it's signaling the closure of the story. It is not an accident. It was not an accident to use the word in the beginning or in the end. Now it says most Bibles, or a lot of Bibles will say she put the child in her lap, but literally it is she placed the child on her bosom, which reflects tender care and loving care, almost like a mama. It says she's not empty anymore. Her lap, her bosom is no longer empty. It's full with a child. Now some people, hey Damien, come on in. Some people, when you see the word nurse, and when you see the fact that she put the child on her bosom, they interpret this as being a wet nurse situation, like Naomi is actually nursing the child. A little bit too old for that. Highly unlikely that that's what's happening. Basically, this is really just a situation of she's showing love and tenderness to the child by putting it on her lap and really on her bosom. Yeah, I mean, it is unlikely. Yeah, aside from her age, she hasn't just been pregnant.
Yeah.
So therefore, she wouldn't be producing milk anyway. So that's not really the best interpretation. She's actually acting as a guardian on behalf of, or in absence of, natural parents, foster parent, nanny. That's a better interpretation. This is a grandmama loving on her grandbaby and helping raise him. In many ways, this child is as much Naomi's as Ruth's, because the Bible talks about how Obed is a kinsman redeemer for Naomi, and Obed will provide for Naomi. And Obed is the continuation of Naomi's family line, although they don't put it that way because it's a patriarchal society. But it's her family line too. It's her family line too. So that's why this Bible's drawing a picture like it is. All Naomi's problems in the story. Now we know life keeps going, right? Jesus said troubles will come. She's not now like in super retirement and never has a problem again because she had this child come to her. But all the problems that the story raised have now been resolved right here. We talked about this. Lydia raised this question earlier. The neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, Obed is literally one who serves or works. In this context, it is a provider or a guardian. So they basically named him kinsman redeemer. It is equivalent concept. It's no accident. Remember how names mean a lot back then. Obed is probably a shortened form of Obadiah, which means servant of God. Like I said, it's fairly equivalent to the idea of Goel, kinsman redeemer. There are 12 men in the Old Testament, maybe more, maybe less. Sometimes it's hard to tell with the contractions whether they are referencing Obadiah or maybe it's some other name. But as far as we can tell, there are about 12 people in the Old Testament named Obadiah. It is not just a biblical name. There are numerous archaeological references to the name as well, so it's well attested, the name Obadiah. Now, why are the neighborhood women naming this child? Because that's what it says, the women gave him a name. And that's a little odd, right? I think this is the only case in the Old Testament where it says someone other than the parents named the child. So it's notable. There is evidence around that time and before of what's called a birth announcement formula. When a baby was born, there would be situations where it would be announced in a way like this. And sometimes you're kind of attributing the naming to someone who didn't actually do the naming. It's just that's the standard formula. So that's perhaps an option. There is some evidence in cultures like that, in communal cultures where tribal leaders and the community itself would take part in naming other folks' children. When they say it takes a village to raise a child, they're not kidding. That's how they looked at it. In fact, in my parents' culture, it was not unusual for other adults to discipline your child if you're at the mall and you're acting up and your parents aren't doing their job or not around, if they need to whoop your butt. Now, I don't think that's the best idea, but seriously, everyone was involved in raising that child. Parents wanted them to be or not. There is some evidence of John the Baptist, right? And it happened that on the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to call him Zacharias after his father. Now remember, the angel told Zacharias, "You shall name him John," and then struck him mute because he didn't believe. So they come to the naming ceremony, and they ask the mother, "What shall we name him?" And she said, "His name's John." And they said, "No, that can't be right. You don't have a John in your family." So they're arguing with her. So then they ask the husband, "What's his name?" And he writes on the tablet, "His name is John." When he does that, his mouth opens and he begins to praise God. And they say, "Oh, I guess his name is John after all." But the point is do you see how much influence that group had? Because Mama said it's John, and they're like, "No, it's not. We need confirmation." So this is not just the Old Testament. They, as the community, since Elizabeth and Zacharias had to argue to get the name John. But most probably, the best answer we have, because we don't have a definitive answer, most probably Ruth, Boaz, and Naomi named the child, and just for dramatic effect, the writer puts it in the mouths of the women to say, "His name is Obed." They're just repeating. They're kind of praising and happy and saying, "Oh, his name is Obed, his name is Obed." They didn't literally name the child Obed, but because they're saying it, they're like naming him. So that's the best answer we have for that. Peer pressure, right. They didn't want to name him that, but I guess they had to. So the women chorus closes the play. It's more dramatic that way. That might be why they did it. Now, with closing basically with a women's chorus and a focus on Naomi, it highlights that this was a story by women and about women and for women in a way that most other Bible stories are not. That's no accident. And that the problems that they were having, that the ladies were having, resolved in a way that was very, very beneficial for women back then. It ends with marriage and a secure home and offspring.
Like a happy movie.
Like a very happy movie, the kind my wife loves to watch. I always tell her, she's like, you just have a blighted soul, man, because all the movies you like are all these miserable things where it does not work out all right in the end. I'm like, yep, that's exactly right.
Watch a movie, you want to see that in life.
That's exactly what she says. But you know what's...
I'm with her. She can call me, I'll watch it.
Yeah, y'all can do the Reese Witherspoons and all that junk. But what's ironic is because she'll kind of fuss at me when I'm like, "Let's watch this movie." And she's like, "That's so dark and miserable." But the TV shows she watches are dark and miserable. Like they're like these they're basically soap operas, but they happen at night instead of daytime. And I'm like, this is just as like miserable and unhappy. And these folks are just, every time they get up a little bit, they go down into the pits worse than ever before. I'm like, why is that?
But it has to do with relationships.
Correct.
When Mike and I were dating, he took me to see some shoot 'em up, blow 'em up.
Good choice, man. Good choice.
All the people who had relationships wound up getting nice, happy, uplifting relationships wound up getting killed. I started to
It was
cry.
Clint Eastwood, okay?
Dirty Harry. I don't know what it was. It was terrible. I wasn't going to see anything.
Yeah, you're not picking any more movies.
PG, so it had to at least been PG, but it was awful.
Now, just for the record, okay, now she has me on Little House on the Prairie, okay? So I've
Down
been,
that.
Well done.
Excellent. You have brought him to the light side, man. Turned him from the dark. That's awesome.
Michael Landon all the way.
Michael Landon all the way. All right, so it says Obed was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, this is apparently a surprise ending. It's kind of stuck on at the end. Again, if you don't know the story, and you're hearing it for the first time, you may not realize that this is where this family line is going to culminate. So it's kind of a punchy ending. Oh, by the way, all that stuff that happened, it culminated in David, which those folks back then would have been very impressed with and very happy to hear. Ruth's problems have been solved because she got married. Same with Naomi. Her problems have been solved. With this line, father of David, Israel's problems have been solved. Because remember, this is a time when everyone did what was right in his own sight because Israel had no king. So as people are looking back and studying this and thinking on this and saying, what a mess of a time, whatever will save Israel? Here's one answer. David, the king, who was mostly a very good king. He had some major mess ups, but he was mostly a good king. So now that one was problems. Now, these are the generations of Perez. To Perez was born Hezron, to Hezron Ram, to Ram Amminadab, Amminadab Nahshon, Nahshon Salmon, Salmon Boaz, Boaz Obed, Obed Jesse, and Jesse David. A lot of names in there that we don't know a whole lot about. There are typically in the Bible two kinds of genealogies. One is a more general one that just shows relationships amongst tribes and clans. It's not necessarily a linear sort of genealogy. The other is very linear, which traces descent, and it's used to establish the last person's status or claim to a position. Obviously, that is what we're dealing with here. This is David's genealogy, and it is intended to show his descent, show his position. A lot of times they use the linear genealogies to establish who's royal. Well, there's David. Who's a priest, or who's a true Israelite. We see these genealogies in Ezra and Nehemiah when the Jews come back from exile. Those books spend a lot of time saying, let's establish the genealogy so we can show who is a pure-blooded Israelite and who's not. And there's even some discussion when they were installing priests again. The priests who did not have their family records and could not prove that they were directly descended from Aaron were not allowed to be priests. They were uninstalled. So genealogies were very important. Very important. So it's a linear genealogy, but don't confuse that as thinking that means it's exhaustive. In other words, this shows 10 generations, but it is not representing, God is not representing to us that there were only 10 generations between Perez and David. It just tracks 10. Remember, 10 is the number of completeness as far as we can tell. So they have 10 in there just to show a complete line from one to the other, but they are not representing that it is entirely the family line from one to the other. It could be 15 generations, and they're fine with that. When the Jews wrote this, they did not have in mind to exhaustively track every single person. They just wanted to establish the claim.
Even though it says the father of the father of the
That's
father.
Correct.
So it might have been a grandfather or great-grandfather.
Absolutely.
It didn't mean father.
Absolutely. Father was used back then in a very general sense. And you would say, my father was Judah, just meaning I'm in his clan. You could be 14 generations away from him, but you said, my father's Judah, my father's Israel. And son of just meant anywhere along the line, down the line in a straight line. In fact,
I think Jews today they will refer to Abraham as their first father. I mean, they'll say father, but he's our first father.
that's right. And remember what the Pharisees said to Jesus. They said, we are sons of Abraham.
Yeah.
We've never been slaves to anyone. We're sons. Well, you're not sons. But they're just saying we are descended from him, and then, we're not slaves. And Jesus was like, well, yes, you are, actually.
Our forefathers.
Correct. Perez was chosen probably, as we discussed last week, because he apparently was a leading clan in Bethlehem and Judah before David. Once David came on the scene, Perez was most definitely considered a leading clan because his clan line gave birth to David, which made him sort of awesome by osmosis. Who's not listed on this genealogy? We talked about it last week. Judah, who is actually the tribal head. This is the tribe of Judah. He's not listed. Remember why? Because he was not right with Tamar. She had to lure him into giving her children. And it is clear, as far as we can tell, that he's not listed on the genealogy because he's being dishonored for the dishonor that he did to his family line. He did not give Tamar the husband he should have, which was his third son. She had to go get it the way she needed to go get it. And so this is a way of saying, well, because of that, you don't get to get listed in this line to David.
I had asked the question, or made a general comment earlier in the study, was that I had heard that Ruth is so important because it's the only book that ties David, therefore Christ, to the tribe of Judah. That's the only way that
It's the only direct link.
it's the only direct link between Christ and the tribe of Judah.
I don't know that.
And
I'd have to look at Matthew because Matthew goes way back and all that stuff. It may be.
well, I mean, but even then, though, Matthew might be referencing what's told in Ruth. I mean, or
Correct.
known because of Ruth, but it's because of Ruth that we know that Christ is descended from Judah.
Well, this is word for word what a section of the genealogy in Matthew. I was just looking, other than they do throw in Tamar and Ruth. But, I mean, the men are
Same men.
word for word, yeah.
Yep, that might be exactly right. Judah equals what's his name, but much worse. What's his name just didn't want to step up. Judah went way overboard in violating Tamar's right to a husband and a home and a family so that she could have support and be somebody in their eyes. Judah went much further than what's his name. That's why he's not on the list at all. Of course, neither is what's his name. Now, makes me feel happy a little bit. I hate to say this, but when I look at Judah and Tamar and all them, and I think how dysfunctional my family is, like, at least we're not there, okay? I don't know how much that's worth, but at least no one's luring anyone into sex because, all that stuff. So thank God for that, I guess. I don't want to be like the Pharisee who says, thank God I'm not like these other people. I do all these good things, but sometimes I'm like, well, we're not that bad. All right, so like I said, the Old Testament contains very little information about most of the ancestors listed in this genealogy, except Nahshon, who was probably a big deal tribal leader and Aaron's brother-in-law. So he was apparently famous, as best we can tell, and he had a lot of influence at the time. Like I mentioned last week, Boaz is listed 7th in the genealogy on purpose. As far as we can tell, the 7th spot of a genealogy is usually reserved for a place of special honor, because Boaz stepped up and took in 2 women who, as far as he could tell, had just about nothing to offer. He did what he was supposed to do. He took risks, he made sacrifices, and now he gets listed on the 7th place of the genealogy as a place of honor. Judah not listed at all. Boaz.
If Judah was there, then he would have been down to 8, right?
Well, maybe they would have taken someone else off, because they would have been happy to manipulate the numbers, right, and just make it the way they wanted. It would still have been, accurate, but Naomi said Ruth was better than 7 sons. In some ways, perhaps they're saying she's even better than Boaz, who was the 7th son of. Crowd bless Boaz's house to be. All right, interesting tidbit. David's name might not actually be a name. It may be a title, and I neglected to look it up and see what that might mean. The reason why we're not sure it's actually his name is because there's no other person in the Bible named David. Now consider that for a moment. They recycled names all the time, especially royal names. Kings' names got used as the generations proceeded. David the 5th, David the 8th, David the 200th, whatever. There's no other David in the Bible, and people don't quite know why, and they're suggesting that maybe that's not a name but a title.
Or they retired his number.
Or they retired his number. Could be. Could be. That's a good point. It's surprising.
Is there another Solomon?
There's Salmon and other variations of that. So that's a good question too.
Or Saul, are there other names that we only can think of one person that they also?
Good question. I didn't even think to look at that, but that's a very good point. I know there are variations of Solomon, which is a variation of the word peace, shalom. So it does show up. But along those lines, maybe they retired his number because David is arguably the most important Old Testament character. Moses and David are in sort of contention for which one is much more important. Moses, obviously, the law came down on Mount Sinai, and that's when Israel became, in many ways, a nation. David institutes the temple and the temple worship, and the temple was so important to Jewish identity and to Jewish worship. It's hard to decide which was more important. But the point is as magnificent as David was in many respects, no one else is named after him. And the best answer might be because they said we're going to keep that special. Now note what's interesting. Remember how we kept talking ad nauseum that when the kinsman redeemer would come and redeem the boy, eventually the boy would become not the kinsman redeemer's son. He would become the son of the dead relative. But when you look in this line here, Obed is reckoned through Boaz. It says Boaz and Ruth had Obed. So technically speaking, it's still Boaz's son, even though legally speaking it wasn't supposed to be. And the commentary I read said that's because authentic lines of blood have won out over legal fiction. God has said. I realize that we had lots of, faux family relationships going on, and we're going to name this and we're going to name that, but ultimately, Boaz, this is your son, and because you did what you needed to do, I'm going to let you have the honor.
That became really important because of both Matthew and Luke, when the two genealogies are mentioned, that they show that through Mary, Jesus has the actual blood relation to David, but through Joseph, he has the legal title. He has the legal.
Correct.
So he's by blood and legal.
That's a lot of good studies on that point, exactly. And we talked earlier, and I went ahead and looked it up. In Matthew, it gives Boaz the credit and Ruth. Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth, so both members are named. So very honoring.
Sebastian?
Yes.
It's interesting, even when Maria mentioned about going back to Matthew and seeing how the lineage is lined out there versus Ruth. In Matthew, it shows that Boaz was the daughter of Rahab.
But what son? You said
son, I'm sorry.
Right.
The son.
Nowadays, maybe you could. Nowadays, you can call it that if you want, but
this is weird. Right. This is weird. I'm thinking too much about my point. I'm putting the words together. But it's weird because we really haven't talked about Rahab that much at all. And when we thought about the kinsman redeemer and kind of why was Boaz available, or some of those other things that came up, it was that directly related to Rahab, who was still outside of the Jewish,
correct.
Obviously a hero,
yes,
more later on.
Yes.
But if it was Samuel the writer or whomever, they would not have put that much emphasis on her. And yet, here is Boaz, who's obviously very important in what's going on. But I think that was the interesting twist when Maria mentioned that. I just double checked it. It shows that I did not make that connection in any other part of our discussions about how critical his mother was in all this.
Or could it be like his grandmother, great-grandmother?
Correct.
Right.
Because I was going to say, they didn't say anything like, because Rahab could have come into town and go, let me see my
little baby.
Yeah,
right.
But they don't say anything about her.
Correct. And it is possible that it's just one generation and she was, or 5 generations. It's called telescoping. They telescope genealogy so that you're never quite sure if the time period is close or far, because they don't care. They just don't give a fig. The whole point was to draw a connection to that person, and the time is not that relevant to them.
Well, and I think in one of your lessons you talked a little bit more about why was someone with Boaz's prominence and stature in the community, they don't give the indication that he was polygamous. Why was he available, or what was the situation that would have caused him to stand out like he did? And it just hit me. Well, that was just
his
one.
Mom.
His mom was.
Yeah.
So a little bit of hey, that guy's special.
Maybe.
Or I was going to say, like, if anyone knew his heritage, wouldn't they might want to ostracize?
Yeah.
He was special in
special in the we don't want anything to do with you kind of way, because your mom was a Gentile prostitute or great grandma or whatever.
And she was important to what happened.
Correct.
But
yes.
Not fully embracing that.
Correct. And so there would be some who would say, the more faithful Jews, you would hope, would say, well, God used her, God accepted her, we're not worried about what she used to be, but what she is. But there would be a whole set of them who would say, your mom was a Gentile whore.
Yeah.
And I will never forget that, and I will never let you forget it.
But there's instances even before this where, as I've heard, but God accepts was it Cain or Abel? It was Abel. It wasn't the firstborn. It was Abel. It was was it Esau or was it Isaac?
Jacob.
Or Jacob. Was it and so we took the second line there, or was it more importantly was it Isaac or Ishmael?
Yeah.
So you always look at God. God doesn't always just say, okay, first in line, there you go. First in line, there you go. I'm going to work it through what appears to be the weaker or rejected line.
Amen. Which is good, because I would never qualify as anything else. In God's eyes, Boaz's family line did not die. Even if there were no other kids, and legally speaking, Boaz eliminated his family line and carried on to Elimelech's. God said, no, that's not really what happened. That's not really what happened. So the point, and this is our last point, and we're done with this study. Chesed, remember that word? It's going to show up again. I'm telling you, I'm putting together the Trinity study, and I've seen Chesed a couple of times. So if you think you're done with that word, you never will be. We're going to get up to heaven, and we're going to hear about that. That's what we're going to be singing about. Chesed, which is kindness, plus faithfulness, which is the willingness to do what God has asked us to do. plus God's provision always results in enormous blessings, even when we stand in the valley of the shadow of death, like Naomi, who was death all around her, and Ruth. But when they did what God called them to do, which was be kind to one another and work, he said, that's fine, I can work with that. All right. Thank you. It's been quite a journey.
I was expecting it. I was hoping the slide to give us a
recap. Well, no comments. Okay, all right. And I have a little something prepared here that we're going to do in just a second. We have time for it. So we started in January 2016. Barley.
Oh, barley.
I remember I wanted to roast it because that's what they did in the story, but I was too complicated. So I boiled it, and I know they didn't have, just so y'all know, in case, I don't know who has what dietary restrictions, but I put beef bouillon in it. Okay, so I don't know, Christian, do you eat meat? Okay, then you may just want to just be with us. I'm sorry. I thought after I did, I was like, I should have saved some out, but I didn't know this situation. So we started Ruth in January 2016. We took 2.5 months off over the summer for the temple study. Finished November 2016, which means we took about 8 months. I learned a lot.
To cover 4 chapters.
Yeah. 2 months a chapter. That's pretty quick, right? We need to slow it down. Man. Seriously.
We set a record here somewhere.
Right. What do you guys think we accomplished?
I know some things about Ruth I never knew.
Yeah. We're just about like
I think it's
time a lot.
well, and I think character development. I mean, there was probably more just in studying it so intensely, it was just in developing the characters and just really kind of seeing, is that how God develops character as well. So.
Amen.
And how he uses what different cultures know about poetry and literature and stuff for his glory, because you showed how a lot of the things, words or methods of speaking used in the first part of the story were used to bookend it in the last part of the story, and I didn't know about that.
Me neither, frankly.
Yeah.
Excellent. I'd heard the concept before, but I'd never seen it as much detailed as we did, so it was a blessing to me. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will not hunger, and he who believes in me will never thirst. His word is our food. So, yes, everything we've said, and the bottom line is when you focus on God's word like we did, it feeds us in a way which maybe we don't even realize on the front end, but as we look back, I have so many experiences in life where I go through it and maybe I'm paying attention, maybe I'm not, and then one day God puts it on my heart and I realize, oh my gosh, how much did I learn? How much did I change? Even if it was subtle, but the subtle change over time really changed my trajectory. We are fuller in Christ than before we started. And all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they were drinking from a spiritual rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. This is obviously talking about the Israelites as they were wandering through the desert. And Paul is saying they all ate the same food, which is not just physical food, but they worshiped the same God. And they enjoyed the same spirit. And when they did that, they became closer as a community, which we are now. All Scripture is inspired by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, for training in righteousness, so that the man of God may be adequate, equipped for every good work. It's Scripture. It is not just an obscure story in an obscure time with obscure words. It is part of the tapestry that God has woven in the Bible. It's a thread, but there is no thread that is more important than any other thread. If you pull one out, the whole thing starts to come apart. And you can't pull one out. It's God's Word. But I'm talking about if you look at it that way, if you pull out that thread, then everything unravels. I'm often reminded of Jesus. It said Jesus' tunic that the centurions argued over and tried to gamble was all of one piece. That meant it was extremely expensive. And people don't realize that. Jesus was poor. He said, I have nowhere to lay my head, but he got gifts in his ministry. People would come up and support him and give him things. And one of the things they gave him was a tunic all of one piece, which was a princely gift. It's the same way with his word. It is all of one piece. And it is so much more valuable because of that. So, I had initially discussed perhaps doing a communion, but I'm not ordained, so we're not going to do a communion because you shouldn't. I'm not saying you can't, but we need someone ordained to do it. We're not going to do a communion, but we're going to do something that's communion-y-ish.
Can I ask why?
Why what?
Why do you need someone
Well, if, we don't take communion as literally as some. The Catholics say it's not representative of the body and blood of Christ. It is the body and blood of Christ, and therefore we need someone specifically called by Christ to minister that to people. We don't put it quite the same way, but I still respect the idea of saying Jesus ordained this and said, do this in remembrance of me. And he did the first communion like that and passed it on to his apostles. And I'm not saying you can't do it if you're not ordained, but I just would rather not. I just would rather kind of step back and say, we're going to let the folks that have been specially commissioned by God minister this. So, we're not doing communion, but like I said, I prepared some barley, and barley is obviously because it was in the story. And Brother Steve has offered to help, so I've got a serving spoon in there.
Okay.
And we're going to just do a couple of spoonfuls. You're welcome to have all you want. I brought plenty. Which I made last night. And like I said, for those of you who don't do beef bouillon, or if you're allergic to certain grains, you may not want to do this. And while we do that, if you wouldn't mind, just there's a serving spoon, and I guess Richard, would you mind helping out a little bit so I can kind of keep talking while y'all do this? One spoon, one cup, and however much you want to put in there. All right. So, why barley? Well, in verse 122, the women returned to Judah at the time of the barley harvest. Chapter 2 takes place, the entire chapter takes place on a barley field. Boaz serves Ruth roasted barley. And like I said, I wanted to do that, but I couldn't pull it off. I was like, I don't know how long it's going to take. And this took 45 minutes to boil. And I'm like, golly, how long is it going to take to roast? I don't even know. And whatever. So I just left that alone. But Boaz served Ruth roasted barley. Ruth takes Naomi a bunch of barley as a gift, right? As a promise, as a, I'm not playing with you guys. I'm serious about what I'm saying, and here's my earnest money. Chapter 3 takes place on a barley threshing floor. Barley, 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 barley. Boaz sends 6 measures of barley to Naomi, okay? The story, it's not about barley, but boy, does it include barley.
Hey, there's barley and beer, isn't there?
Yes, which I almost brought. No, I didn't. Yeah. Barley represents spiritual and physical food in this story. There's no question that it plays a dual role.